But we'd definitely like to thank Ascendium for their generous support, allowing us to bring all of you together today and over the next 2 years. So I'd love to turn it over to Carolyn Lee, our program officer, to say a few words.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm just excited to join you all today to kick off the Midwest Credential Transparency Alliance. Just very briefly wanted to share with you why credential transparency matters to Ascendium, and I hope why it matters to you and your states and institutions as well. Ascendium's mission as a national post-secondary education philanthropy is to elevate post-secondary opportunity and increase socioeconomic mobility for learners from low-income backgrounds. And we believe that it's important that learners have access to diverse pathways into high-quality education and training after high school, education and training that will meet their needs and career goals. So we know, as I'm sure most of you do, that there are in fact hundreds of thousands of credentials available, thanks to the research by our friends at Credential Engine, an overwhelming amount, frankly. So the work that MHEC and Credential Engine will be leading and that you all will be driving is aimed squarely at making sense of that enormous ecosystem of credentials, precisely so that students and workers who stand to gain the most from obtaining an industry-validated credential aren't left in the dark when it comes to finding and completing those credentials. And doing this work across the entire Midwest region really leverages your collective effort toward measurably improving credential transparency for all types of learners, especially those historically underserved by traditional higher education. Again, we all know this is an extremely complex endeavor, so I simply want to extend my sincere appreciation and admiration for all of you for committing to this necessary effort. For our part, Ascendium is thrilled to be your partner and excited to learn alongside all of you as this work commences. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for those really kind and great context-setting words. I'd now love to introduce Scott Cheney, Credential Engine's President and CEO, and Susan Heegard, the President of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, for some opening remarks. So Susan, I think you're first.
Great. Hi, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. It looks like we have a great group here present, 85 of you. So thank you for taking the time this afternoon. And I want to extend a big thanks to Carolyn and her team, and to Scott and his team, and then all the rest of you who have joined today. So I know the people who are familiar with the compact, this will be very, very redundant, but I have to go through a few brief opening remarks here just to make sure everyone's on the same page. But for those of you that don't know what a compact is, it's something that's legally recognized actually in our Constitution of the United States Constitution, and it really allows states to do things together across state lines. And we're the Midwest Higher Education Compact. There are 4 compacts in the country: one in the East, one in the South, one in the West, and we are the compact in the Midwest. And actually, our footprint is the same as the Midwest Census region, all 12 states. We were legislatively created in 1991 through the Council of State Governments, or CSG, their Midwest Legislative Conference, and we work very, very closely with them still. We're governed by 60 commissioners and some additional alternates, and there are about 5 from each state. And one of the things I really love about my job is that it's a place where higher ed leaders, whether they're from a large university or a very small college, nonprofit college, for example, and legislators and governors, policy advisors can get together and talk about higher education and the pressing needs in their states. Okay, great. So one of the things, I've been on board for about 2.5 years, and I have a background in state and federal government for the most part, and philanthropy too. But I always need to think first and foremost, what is the value that we provide to our states and our region? What is the ROI and return on investment? So we're kind of known as the cost savings compact, and that's great. And we do a lot of that. In fact, we're able to benefit the region as well as the rest of the country in this regard, but we also have some important policy and research related programs as well. So our cost savings programs are technology, hardware, software services, property insurance, student health insurance, and cyber insurance. And the folks on the call here who are in our membership know these are opportunities to kind of do bulk purchasing, et cetera, across the region and country. Then we've got some policy related programs, and many of those fall under Jenny's area, who you'll hear from next, I believe. Open education resources, credential transparency, NC Sarah, which is the distance learning initiative, MCMC, which is the military credit program we have, and our MSEP program, which is our interstate student reciprocity program. We also have a robust research program in our compact. So there's a cool interactive dashboard if you haven't already seen that. And we have regular reports that we produce on data trends informed by you, as well as other specific requests. And I think one of the key things I referenced is that we really feel like convening is at the heart of our work. So bringing together legislative, executive branch, as well as other higher education leaders to problem solve and share ideas together. And this has really become even more important during the pandemic, when we've learned how to convene and develop community in all sorts of different ways. So our credential related work, which is what brings us here today, there are a couple things that are related to this effort is e-transcripting, our contract with Parchment, comprehensive learner records. We have an advisory group, and I will just say as a compact, we're very, very deeply informed by volunteers who serve on committees across our organization. We have a concurrent enrollment teacher credentialing initiative. We also have, as I mentioned, the multi-state collaborative on military credit, and now the Midwest Credential Transparency Alliance. Next slide, great. And am I doing the slide? Can you guys remind me?
I think that's the smooth transition to me.
Great. So smoothly, I am now transitioning to my buddy here, Scott Cheney, who looks like he's settling in before a beautiful sunset somewhere.
If I had my druthers, I'd be on one of the many lakes in northern Minnesota, but I'm not. So you can all pretend. So Susan, thank you. Great to continue the partnership with MHEC. We've been working together now for a couple of years. And Carolyn, let me extend my thanks again to you for Ascendium support for this work. So Credential Engine, I'll just do a quick overview. Many of you know us. Many of you are probably learning about us still for the first or second time. So I'll just do a very quick overview, and then we'll get into the actual content of the day. So we were established about 4 years ago, but we grew out of work that Lumina Foundation had funded for 3 years prior to that, with the goal of trying to find a way to bring more comprehensive transparency to the very complex marketplace of credentials in the United States, and to support states and institutions and learners and employers being able to have a common resource to identify credentials of value, credentials of quality, as they were trying to support meeting their attainment goals that Lumina and many states have set. So this was done through the idea of developing a linked, open, interoperable data network that is open to everybody and contains essential information about the entire marketplace of credentials. And you can see there that we've had quite a bit of support from a number of foundations and others who have believed in this work and really recognize the value to the entire ecosystem. So on the next slide, we can see why it matters. And Carolyn alluded to this in her opening remarks. When I took this job, one of the first questions I asked was, if we're looking to bring transparency to the entire marketplace of credentials, what does that marketplace look like? And nobody knew. No one had a complete count and a complete arms around this landscape. So we've been commissioning now for 3 years. We'll be going to our 4th year this year, a research report to try and understand what that marketplace looks like. And our most recent report identifies just short of 1 million unique credentials, from high school diplomas, badges, certificates, certifications, licenses, apprenticeships, degrees of all types and all levels in the United States alone, offered by somewhere over 50,000 unique providers. We don't have a firm count on that. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of competency frameworks that underlie those credentials. And we spend somewhere close to $2 trillion in this country every year on education and training. So if we're really going to try and help learners navigate their way through all of this marketplace and help educators be able to understand and policymakers be able to put the best resources toward the right programs, we need much more information and much more transparency about this entire marketplace. So we were established to fill a void, to bring that open source schema to the marketplace to help bring some sense and some openness to this entire space. We were the first ones to do it, and to our knowledge, no one else is doing this as comprehensively across this entire landscape as we are using linked open data. You can see from the next slide, just a quick snapshot. We'll send these out. I know you're not going to be able to read this entire chart, but part of our report this year was not just to have a national number, but to also break it down by state. So you can see exactly how many credentials of certain types are offered in each state. This doesn't count the number of credentials that are offered by national organizations or employers who serve the entire country, but it'll give every state some idea about what is probably in their location. So just a quick word then about Credential Engine itself. We are a nonprofit entity. We are completely community-based. So the next slide will just give you a highlight of this. We do work with educators, employers, researchers globally to develop this schema and to make sure that it's open and usable by anyone that needs it. We are not an entity that actually issues credentials, and we don't verify credentials. We really support that underlying data infrastructure that makes the whole marketplace much more web-friendly and modern. We're working now with 22 states and regions. The next slide has a map that just gives you an idea of where we have current partnerships, signed partnerships. Obviously, through this partnership, we're aiming to bring on the other Midwestern states under MHEC from Missouri, Nebraska, Wisconsin, North Dakota. We also anticipate South Carolina and a couple of other states on here to be joining soon. So we think we'll be over 30 states by the end of the year, which we're very pleased about the number of states that have seen the value of credential transparency. And then finally, I'll just close quickly with a nod toward the policy side of all of this work. We've been working now for about a year with these organizations in working to advance state policy, whether it be in a state strategic plan, executive orders, guidance and regulations around eligibility requirements and reporting, or actual legislation in a handful of states now, to advance this mission and this vision of really making sure that anyone, anytime, anywhere can have access to comprehensive information about credentials. So with that, I'll pass it along. I do see that there's already one hand raised, and Emily, I'm going to take your guidance on whether we are taking questions now or whether you want to hold for just a second.
I think we'll hold. We have a lot of agenda to get through, but if you do have questions, I would put them in the chat and we can try to weave them in and address them later as well. So definitely encourage that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Parks, MEC's Vice President of Policy and Research, to continue on.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Scott and Susan. Welcome, everyone. I know most of you on the call, but for those of you with whom I am not overly familiar, greetings. I look forward to working with you on this work in the near and the medium and the future. So as I'm going to kind of reiterate, but also recontextualize some of the points that have already been made. I think it's important to understand that the work we're doing is deeply embedded in a national context, but that we do have a regional focus. As we said, there are more than 1 million credentials in the US. And I love the data that is created by Credential Engine. For those of you who have not explored the site and really taken advantage of it, I highly encourage it. It's very inspiring, but it's also overwhelming. That's why we're taking this state by state. And in particular, right now, we're taking a regional approach. There are approximately 100,000 credentials in the 12 Midwestern states, and we're really hoping that the lion's share of them can come onto the registry in the next few years. One of the things that I think is really important to understand is why this work is so important, again, in a national, but also in a regional context. We do know that credentials as they are earned by individuals reduce financial and social inequality, which is a really big issue for us, again, nationally, but at MEC, it's our first strategic priority is that we have to understand how certain populations are underserved by our higher ed systems and don't have equal participation in our economy. And the more that we can be transparent with credentials and help people understand them, the more equity we can bring to a system for them to get the credentials they need as quickly as possible. This increases social mobility and economic opportunities. So once again, these are all tied together. I know sometimes it's hard to see what's going to be the end result of all of this work, some of which is very technocratic. But in the end, we are talking about not just moving the needle on the number of credentials that are in the registry, but really moving the needle on social justice, educational and social and economic participation. And with that in mind, we also increase the good to our economy and to our society as a whole. Informed and educated citizens participate more, and they participate in a more conscientious manner. So we are proposing a value-added approach that is regional in its focus. We want to make sure that even as our states are doing their really good work independent of each other, they're also working alongside each other so that we can address issues of credit transfer and interstate credential pathways, so that we can acknowledge the fact that students, workers, and employers are mobile. You might need to change where you were seeking your credential in the middle of your path, or you might need to be able to transfer your credential. We also need to understand that you might earn your credential in one place, but ultimately then be employed by an employer in another state. And we also need to make sure that we are not reinventing the wheel and that we're being efficient, that we're building on the successes of others. Some states have done a tremendous job of staging their data, collecting it, organizing it, translating it into the CTDL. And so there's no reason why everyone has to go to all that trouble now, that there are some really great models they can follow. Finally, why not leverage all of the relationships that MEC has with states, institutions, and professional communities? And finally, we just want to build on the efforts of all of the good work that's going on out there. So again, this is a value-added approach. We're not actually asking you to do anything different than you're already doing, except to share what you're doing and learn from those who are sharing with you as well. So we welcome you to the Midwestern Credential Transparency Alliance. And we're really excited to create a community of practice and a professional community where we tackle this big problem together. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. And hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Grant. I work here at Credential Engine. And I thought what I'd do is share a little bit about the MCTA itself and get into some of the programming details there that are referenced in your briefing book that you got as part of your registration. But given the size and scope of the folks that are registered here, it's probably good to just do a little deeper step on credential transparency itself. And so, like Scott and Jenny mentioned, the scale of the marketplace is really large, with almost 1 million credentials. And in this counting, a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Minnesota would count as one credential. But we know it's not just degrees, that today there are all kinds of credentials. There's certificates, certifications, apprenticeships, licenses, micro-credentials, badges, and more. And all of that is just hard to understand, all of those options. And we feel like it's especially hard because we don't share a common language about credentials yet. And that's in many ways what our efforts are about advancing. So we can help everyone understand the credentials, their details, and connection points. And many people are involved in solving that problem. Colleges, businesses, government agencies have been working on it and beginning to collaborate more. And that's where we see the potential of the MCTA, is to extend that work across the Midwest collectively. So on the next slide, we'll get into a core part of this work, which are, as you might expect, data. Our approach is to use what's worked so well in many other industries, retail sectors, the hotel industry, travel, linked open data. You don't need to be a technical person to know that Google Maps works. And on the next slide, we kind of reveal a little bit behind the curtain for you about how this operates. At Credential Engine, we've been developing the Credential Transparency Description Language, or CTDL schema, for over 5 years. And in the next little animation here, you can see one of the definitions come up, this one for certification. The fact is that groups of subject matter experts have worked with us to define key terms, and every word of every term is roundly debated and quite intentional. So on the next slide, I'll kind of connect that for you, where it's not just a bunch of terms. There's a grammar to CTDL about how the terms connect to one another. And the benefit there is that then humans and machines can use the language to understand very basic things about a credential. In this one, we're showing a dental assisting certificate that's offered from an accredited institution that requires students to demonstrate a particular competency. And if you use more CTDL terms, you can describe more aspects of that credential. We've also been developing several open technologies that help people speak CTDL. We're known for the registry. Many of you are actually already involved in helping publish data to the registry. And that is the way that we're advancing this language aspect of our work. And on the next slide, we just wanted to highlight how we don't do any of this work alone, that there are multiple levels of engagement and multiple stakeholders. And as a result of doing it in a collective sense, we feel like there are benefits to everyone. So learners and workers can see all of their options and make an informed enrollment decision, so that credential providers can clearly differentiate their credentials based on their quality and the value, unique value they have, so that employers can find and hire people with the skills and competencies for the jobs that they are trying to fill. And state and federal policymakers can understand how credentials are serving everyone in the economy and advancing our economic goals in that regard. So we feel like everyone benefits from credential transparency. Now, on the next slide, we get into some of our strategy here, where what we've been doing, as Scott alluded to, is working directly with states using a common roadmap and action guide. And each of these states, as you expect, have their own culture, challenges, affordances, things they do well. And thanks to a National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator grant, we were able to go fairly deep in the state of Indiana with multiple webinars, workshops, and interviews about how to advance this work. And on the next slide, we just kind of highlight the objective here, which is to develop use cases that require linked open data connections across credentials. We found a lot of opportunities in the state around career exploration, pathways, displaced workers' use of their training benefits, and new forms of achievement records. And on the next slide, we've got some details about our work in the South Bend Elkhart region of northern Indiana and southwest Michigan, where they're focused on skill-based hiring and micro-credentials. And together, they've done a lot of work and accomplished a lot in focusing on their local labor market needs collectively. And but the common challenge is to define, access, combine, describe, share, and compare information about credentials. And it's not a problem of any particular state, and I don't want to say it's a problem of individual people having the right skills or knowledge to do the work. We feel like this is an information problem about individuals working in isolation and not being sufficiently supported and encouraged to work on common problems collectively. And so that's one of the opportunities here with the MCTA, is to build that community. On the next slide, I wanted to highlight some encouraging results we found along the way in our partnership with MHEC. We surveyed all of the Midwest states about this kind of work last year and how to best move it forward. And on the next slide, we have some good news to report. The good news is that the MHEC commissioners were very encouraging about this focal point on credential transparency. They did make 2 recommendations. They said, if you want to be successful, make sure you include all the stakeholders. So that is consistent with Credential Engine's approach and consistent with, I think, the registration turnout we see here on this call. And the other was to make sure you're fitting this work into where they're at. Use web meetings, have small action teams. And that's in many ways the design of the MCTA. So now on the next slide, I'm going to get into some of the details of our working draft charter. This is a very preliminary initial document that's trying to help us as a group talk about how we want to work together around these common goals and common needs. And so what I'll do is just go through very briefly each of the 4 main sections here to highlight some key points. But I want you to know that this isn't a final document, and we'll have opportunities, well, now through the chat and also after this meeting in an email follow-up, ways for you to share your comments and feedback, how we could make this stronger, how we could change the language, how we could expand it, so that next time we meet, we'll have a more finished document to review together, okay? So let's look at the first section here. What is it? This is where we're focusing in on the particular goals and high-level operations. And in this section, we call out 4 different intended outputs from our convenings. One is networks. We're getting people together across state lines. We're promoting some peer-to-peer interactions. Actually, the rest of this meeting will be peer-to-peer interactions in small topic breakout groups where you'll be able to communicate directly. We're going to produce new resources. We'd like to be intentional about documenting the successes and challenges you're having in this regard to help other people, especially any use cases that involve transitioning data across state lines. Those are very ripe for additional resource development, guidance, and help to others. Action teams. These action teams can go deeper on particular topics. They can meet outside of our quarterly get-togethers, and they can help us define if there are any opportunities to do more with MEC's longstanding strong capabilities around master business contracts, RFP requirements, that type of thing. They've done a lot of good work with e-transcripts that Jenny mentioned. And then dissemination. So this is very broad, but we feel like the more informed people are about this work, the easier it will be to advance it. And so we'd encourage volunteers and everyone to help us spread the word through the communities you're connected with already about credential transparency work. Okay, so that was kind of the what is it section. Let's look at the next one. It's why does it matter? Actually, much of this has already been covered earlier here. We highlighted a couple key points. We have this bulleted list where we highlight a couple of very basic, simple questions that students and workers are going to have today and are very hard to answer because we don't have good data about all the opportunities available to students and workers. Now, that's a choice. There are other stakeholders with other questions, and there are other topics. So please help us make sure we're capturing the most important questions here about why this work matters and to whom. And then we also have an important paragraph here about how this alliance fits and advances both the economic and the moral imperatives of our Midwest region. And so I think that's a key piece. If we can make it stronger or more explicit, we should do that. Okay, let's go on to the next section here about who does it. This is maybe a little unique to us because we have such an eclectic mix of people involved in the MCTA. And what we tried to do was form 4 coherent categories of stakeholders and talk about the value of credential transparency to each of their perspective. Okay, there may very well be other groups that should be called out as well, and so that's not a intentional slight to anyone. It's just these are the 4 that were top of mind to us as we were getting this form for you, and we'd like your help in talking about who all can be involved and what the benefit is to them of being involved in this work. Okay. The take home is anyone can be a credential transparency champion. So let's look at the last section here. how does it work? This is maybe an area where lots of flexibility. We'll have a lot of time to update and work on this. We initially just call out that we're planning to work quarterly, have quarterly meetings, and then have these action teams that can meet in between those meetings to go deeper on particular topics. And the second paragraph here lays out some of the somewhat ambiguous at this point, but intentional focus on volunteers. The fact is we really need to have volunteers to be successful in this work. And so there's a place for everyone to contribute, and we want to be explicit about that in our charter. And the final paragraph does a lot of work in a few sentences, but it does allude to this intention to partner with MHEC and with you on common requirements for technical and business procurement decisions. That's a very powerful way that the region can operate collectively to advance credential transparency. Okay, so that's the charter. Like I say, if folks have any initial thoughts in the chat, please add them. But we will have a way to give us feedback after the event through an email survey probably, or some email communications. And I'm just really thrilled that we're getting started on this important work. So Emily, I'll turn it back to you now.
Great, thanks, Jeff, and thanks everyone for taking in a pretty packed 36 minutes of content, but I think it was all really useful to set us up for success and make sure that we have we're all sort of on the same page about what we're trying to do together. So we're going to transition to our next activity. I encourage you, if you need to stand up, take a stretch, and I'll turn it over to Jen Briones, Credential Engine's project manager, and Sarah Appel, MEC's Associate Director of Policy Initiatives, to get the next activity going.
Thank you, Emily, for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. I know many of you, but wanted to say that before we transition into our breakout groups, we wanted to do an activity as a full group. And Sarah's going to give the instructions on what we're going to do together. But before we do that, I wanted to share some of the results from that survey that Jeff was mentioning of MEC commissioners and leaders. So we asked them, we listed out these state priorities that you see here, everything from careers to planning, quality, all the way down to performance and policy. And you can see here, we asked them to mark if this is a current priority, a future priority, not a priority, or don't know. So, the numbers kind of speak for themselves, but our main takeaways were that current priorities included careers, helping displaced and transitioning workers gain skills for better jobs, and performance, so meeting those statewide secondary and post-secondary credential attainment goals, because again, these were related to credentials, of course, as we're trying to advance credential transparency. And then for the future, you see that return on investment was a future goal for many states, along with competencies. Although with competencies, you notice that the numbers were kind of spread out between current, future, and not a priority. So the role of competencies wasn't, at least for those who responded to the survey, wasn't as consistent across states. And the reason we wanted to share these state priorities with you is because it'll hopefully get your ideas flowing for the activity that we're going to do together. So Sarah, do you want to tell us about our activity?
Sure. I've entered into the chat a link to Padlet. If you would go ahead and click that link.
And I'm going to share my screen as well to share the Padlet.
So this will be kind of like our bulletin board. All you need to do to leave a comment is double click and just start writing. So if you want to share something about what your state is doing, maybe you have some questions, maybe you're progressing with your state agenda on this perfectly. So we'd love to hear that.
And you can see that we're getting some results already. So yeah, type away, everyone. I have here over the next 2 years, but feel free to elaborate or, we'll also open it up for folks to share verbally after we start getting some results in here. Another thing you can do on Padlet is if you see something, so quality, equity outcomes, if you see something you agree with, you can click on that heart.
This is great. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, agreed. I'm loving seeing these results thus far and coming up in real time as well.
Mhm.
So I am seeing so far a lot of the word alignment. That is core to advancing credential transparency work. And a lot of what you all are saying, aligning, transitioning military members with career and education paths. For any learner, for anyone who's seeking an opportunity, you want to make sure that those opportunities are aligned across different sectors and across different levels. Short-term credentials, aligning credentials to college credit, alignment and performance of CTE programs to dynamic labor market needs.
The completion of credentials for folks who maybe had to stop out of their original training and need to come back so they can complete that. That's awesome.
Yes. And I imagine that many of you are sharing this from the state perspective, but since this is a regional initiative that we're taking on together, we can apply many of these to the region as well, and encourage you all to share about that. And also when you get into the breakout sessions, because we really do want to be applying these priorities that you have top of mind to the work that we do together. Approved transfer pathways, love that one. Clear and equitable career pathways, equity and access among career pathways. So again, many of you are thinking the same thing. Okay. I am noticing a slowdown in the addition of sticky notes, but this was a lot amazing, and feel free to keep adding. Also, we can keep this Padlet board for our community use together. But does anyone want to unmute, share why you shared what you wrote, share how this applies to not only your state, but to the Midwest region? Or you can put it in the chat as well. Or yes, feel free to keep adding on here, commenting on each other's, adding those hearts in there.
Hey, Jen, this is Scott. One question I have is I'm looking at the improved transfer pathways. I just posted a question. I'd welcome people's feedback. Are people who both wrote that and giving it the hearts thinking about just within state, or is this an opportunity to do work across state lines within the Midwest? So we really are supporting both transfer and pathways between states. I'm just curious for people's feedback there.
Someone commented in the chat, thank you, Crystal. Across state lines is great. across states would be an excellent idea. If we could get MOUs through across state lines is essential. Great, thank you all.
We have
Other,
that have liked different ones that are coming up there into the 10 and 11 mark. So thank you so much.
yes, and I see folks are still adding their ideas in here.
We can't get enough ideas.
That's right. And that was the purpose of this activity, was to get those in here all in one place to fuel our thinking for the future. So we are getting a lot of comments that across state is really what folks were thinking about, which is good. Thank you. Thank you for those comments and for that feedback. Again, encourage you to continue adding, even when we move on to the next piece of the agenda. Feel free to keep adding to this, commenting on each other's posts and adding those hearts in there. So again, so we can focus our work together. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on? All right, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Emily.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody for all of that great input and insight. I think we're always looking to continue to pick your brains and learn about what your goals and priorities and challenges are, which is exactly what we're going to transition to, just in smaller groups. We took the information that we got through registration and conversations we've had with many of you, and it aligns well actually with a lot of what you just put in Padlet and a lot of that conversation too. And we're going to have breakout groups on a few different topics related to credential transparency, both sort of the publishing side and getting use out of the registry side of things. Again, just to learn more about what's going on in your state, what your goals are, what your challenges are, and what we can try to accomplish as a region and as a collective. So we're about to open up the registry or the breakouts, but just quickly, the 5 rooms are going to be around coordinated publishing workflows so that's really around what that source data looks like and sort of thinking about efficient publishing and maintenance of that data. Career pathways, transfer value, and prior learning assessments. So thinking about how all of that information can be connected to help learners navigate their options. Using micro-credentials for equitable mobility. So focusing on how you can document smaller bits of learning to address equity challenges. The 4th one is digital records, credentials, and employers. So really focused on those learning and employment records and other forms of digital credentials. And then finally, one on career exploration and end user tools. So how can this data be used in tools that are designed for learners to explore their options? So Annika is about to open up those breakout rooms to choose your own adventure. You can click the breakout room in your meeting controls at the bottom of the screen. So that will display the list of the options for breakout rooms. You will hover your pointer over the number to the right of the breakout room you want to join, and then click join, and then you'll have to confirm that by clicking join. But if you have any issues logging in or getting into that breakout room, just let us know in the chat which one you want to join and we'll help you get in there. So Annika is about to open those rooms and we will see you in there. I think we'll give folks a minute to get settled. I hope all of those breakout conversations were really rich and fruitful. I know ours was small but mighty. I learned a lot from my colleagues who allowed me to pick their brain about publishing. So we're going to spend the next little bit just sharing out about what those conversations were about, what folks talked about, some common themes across states and ideas for how to move this work forward regionally. I guess we'll just go in order. And I was the one who led the publishing workflows conversation. So I'll just share a few of the themes that we had and conversations that we had in our group. I wrote down a quote from Beth Megashar at the Department of Workforce Development in Indiana, because I think it's something that we all think about and struggle with, but she said that they're held responsible for data that's really hard to get their hands on. And I think that that is what we're all trying to do here, is better get our hands on data that's hard to find. And so one of the things that that we talked about is at a regional level, what we can probably do is really think about guidance and resources to ensure that there's consistency across the data that's published for the region. I know in New England, they have a minimum data policy for the region. It's something that we could potentially think about. What is the key data that needs to be shared across state lines? And something that we could work on as a collective here is identifying what that might look like. One of those key pieces of information that we talked about is competency and skill information. It's really what differentiates credentials when you get down to it. And so, but that's also, I think what we've found is that's some of the hardest data to find and publish to the registry. So focusing on opportunities there and any technical assistance and support around publishing and mapping competencies, I think is something that would be really useful to do across the region. And that really will enable us to do a lot of the things that you talked about in the other breakout groups. So I think just trying to look at my notes really quickly. Also, just one quick thing, we sort of talked about thinking about, policy recommendations, especially reciprocity across state lines for credentials. It's knowing information and having information in the registry about credentials can sort of be the backbone of that. So I think that's another thing that I know is top of mind for folks. So I think that covers a lot of what we talked about. We'll definitely continue having conversations about how we can support publishing and really improve data workflows there. But I'm going to pass it off to Deb to sort of share what they talked about in her group.
Yeah, certainly. So thank you to this group. It was a really big group. And so we've got a lot of great information in the document that can plow right into the Alliance activities. And so we talked about career pathways, transfer value, and prior learning assessment or credit for prior learning. And those things overlap because they're all ways of helping people understand what they have already achieved and how they can apply it to get further on whatever their desired path is. So we talked about it very broadly across, there's traditional course articulations, there's the credit for prior learning processes that happen at individual institutions to determine whether or not people get credit for courses they took somewhere else or some other credential or work-based training or something else that they could apply to the credential that they're going forward with. Military articulations and pathways to occupations. So as will be a theme across all these groups, probably getting the data out from inside proprietary systems and making it more visible and even standardized is necessary to be able to make these processes more equitable and provide more value to everyone. So some of the things we talked about in terms of working together across the region were just sharing, right? Like, how do we figure out, well, what we all have and how to share it in whatever form it's in, and then how to get it into the registry so that it's in a consistent structured data format and people can start to reuse and rebuild on it And some things like military articulation should be able to be more standardized across all states, across the whole nation. And other things that might be more specific to a particular institution or a state system could still be reused in that, say, for example, you have created a pathway to an occupation based on ONET or Department of Labor standards. And what are some of the things that people need to do to get there? You could have a general pathway framework or pathways for that. And then different institutions could put theirs into it, like our community college certificate program goes here. And our bachelor program gives credit for this certification so that you can stack them. So that that could be a way of working together to not only share the pathways that we already have, but also to be able to construct general pathways that can be reused in a plug and play sort of way. We also talked about faculty assessment and how if we could somehow compile a lot of information about the courses and the credentials that are coming in that people want to get credit for, to make it easier and more effective for faculty to do those assessments and to do them more consistently.
That's great. Sounds like a really rich conversation. Just to move it along, I think, Jen, I'll turn it over to you to talk about your breakout and the takeaways there.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. Yes, I had a medium-sized group for the micro-credentials and equity outcomes breakout session. So thanks to everyone who joined. We talked about, how for many states, just defining what a micro-credential even is an issue and what that means, and that causes a disconnect between, the institutions themselves and then the industry when you're trying to align those things. For the equity piece, though, making sure that as much information about as many credentials are transparent will help increase these equitable opportunities, as well as meeting people where they are, right? Learners, job seekers shouldn't have to try and bend over backwards to meet the systems that are in place. We should be meeting them where they are. So as far as what we can do as a regional initiative, the work that we want to do together, we can figure out how to align these different pieces, continue sharing practice and ideas across states, which is exactly what we're trying to do here with the MCTA. And then Ken Sauer had a great example as well when it comes to that interstate mobility. Perhaps, there are some low-hanging fruit. For example, maybe there are areas where industry certifications in IT, manufacturing, areas like that can result in credit that is easily mobilized across different state lines as well. So yeah, really rich discussion in my group, and also captured it in the notes, and also want to reiterate that it's something that we can continue discussing in future meetings.
Great, thanks, Jen. And yeah, we've all, I think, mentioned that we have good notes, and we'll be synthesizing this, and I'm sure sharing them back out with you as well. So like we've been harping on, I think this is going to continue to inform our conversations and our meetings in the future. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you to talk about your breakout.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I had a great group focused on learner records and employers engagement with learner records. And so there was some great national groups that each of whom have had a long, good history of programming around records innovations, and some states represented in their implementations of that work. North Dakota in particular seems to really have some exciting work going on around the comprehensive learner record in the K-12 context and transcripts. So lots to learn from them. I took a lot of notes as well, just to remember. I think that's a good common practice for the MCTA, is just to be comfortable with Google Docs and contributing to them directly to help. But one of the things we talked about right away was that kind of disconcerting result about the competencies being inconsistently endorsed across the Midwest, and wrestling with the implications of that relative to the career goals being so highly endorsed. And so that disconnect between skills and competency programming and career navigation and acceleration and improvement, that seemed like a gap that was really core to advancing learner records. And so we wanted to think about how could we help people think about learning frameworks in a more holistic way and a more particular way for particular jobs. And so I understand there's some good frameworks out there that many have used. Tom Green had mentioned the AAC&U value rubrics as a framework that many are actually already using in various ways as part of their institutional programming and high quality impact practices. So maybe we can start with something that people are very comfortable and familiar with, but then also go deeper in particular sectors. And cybersecurity was the one that came up. I mean, it's in the news all the time. And they've done a good job in that area to define the competency framework that employers are hiring people around. So how can we get value and do more explicit awareness, communication to connect the dots for employers in the Midwest around competencies and the skills that credential providers are documenting through these records. So that was an exciting thing. I could see a program of work around communications and frameworks right there. But then the other piece that's important are the data. And so ensuring that all the different tools that touch competency data are able to move those data around inside the institution and then move those data outside of the institution into the record, into the registry, into employers' applicant tracking systems. That was another key piece. And so when we get any good demonstration of those key data flows, we want to highlight them. We want to communicate about them so people can see how this can all come together to solve some of our challenges here in the Midwest. So those are the main nuggets, but lots of details got left on the floor. But I wanted to just thank everyone for such a fun discussion.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. And I will kick it over to Eric to take us home.
Yeah, thank you. So we talked about end user tools, right? And we had a pretty lively conversation. Folks are working on a lot of tools to try and get better credential data in front of learners and workers, right? But a lot of it is still kind of siloed. There's a lot of barriers that states are still working on. A lot of our conversation dealt with first overcoming those silos to really build the best end user tool possible, right? And help with effective and efficient career exploration for students. One example that was shared was that sometimes schools have different career exploration tools available and there isn't much interconnectivity between them, right? So depending on what school student goes to, they will be limited in the information that they see, right? So what opportunities they identify as feasible and ultimately what credentials they pursue. So these can have very important implications for equity, right? So better user tools that also give way to broader, more interconnected data would help greatly to this end. We also talked about how many tools and interfaces that allow people to access credential data are built and then tested with users, right? Then taken to students and workers to see how they navigate through them. So we spoke about really starting from the perspective of the end user when building these tools, right? Making sure that they're as easily to navigate as possible. There's a lack of credential data out there for people that's underwhelming, but we also don't want to overwhelm them once we do kind of give them access to it. And really everyone is looking forward to learning from one another through the MCTA, to have formal and informal lines of communication, ask questions, share best practices, give examples of tools that folks are working on, right? So everyone just excited to communicate with each other, break down the silos within the region, within the states themselves, to really break down any barriers we may have with data, to really give end users the best experience and the best tools to get where they need to be.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. And again, thanks everybody for all of your great insight and ideas and all of your work thus far and your collaboration as we move forward. I'll turn it back over to Jeff to sort of sum up where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Well, I think we're right where we wanted to be. So I just wanted to thank all of you for helping make this kickoff so successful. We've been able to very quickly go over some very core foundational concepts together, share openly about state activity and priorities and goals, and then dig deeper on some particular topic areas that are important to you individually, and talk amongst ourselves about those topics and envision some ways we could move it forward as a region. And that exemplifies what I could see the MCTA doing on an ongoing basis moving forward. We're hoping that that spirit is captured in the charter. If you have ideas about how to operate as a region and feel like you could make contributions to the charter, we're going to have a follow-up survey after this event where you can give us feedback and potentially edits right in the document. So we're working on that. We'll get some emails out to you next week about some of those opportunities. We are hoping to meet quarterly. So we'll work on getting a meeting series set up for everyone. And this is really a much easier and better thing if we can have full broad engagement. So if there are folks that you thought of while we were talking about these topics today that could help us, please encourage them to come and join our efforts. Even just keeping aware of our activity and the conversation can lead to another set of work that helps us break through and make progress in the Midwest. So I just want to say thank you. It's been a fantastic event. We're really thrilled with the great turnout and everyone's openness and willingness to help us collaborate on credential transparency. Any parting words, Susan or Scott, others on the team here before we close?
Well, no, just thank you everyone for sticking in there with us on at least it's a beautiful afternoon here finally. But we're pretty excited about this work. And as I think I stuck in the chat, a point that whether you're fairly far along with respect to this work, or you're just interested and kind of sticking your big toe in the water, since it's summer, we welcome work with you and are happy to try to, while we want to have continuity across states, we want to also be very tailored to what works for you. So I just want to express my gratitude and I look forward to what's ahead. Thank you.
I'll just quickly echo that and say if the Padlet exercise is any indication of the energy and excitement and range of ideas that we can tackle together as a region, we'll be at this with gusto for some time. So thank you to everyone for that really exciting picture about what's possible and what you want to work on. We'll get to it with you. We're excited for that chance.
Fantastic. Well, so like I say, have a great weekend here. We're going to send out some materials next week, huddle as a team, and make sure we can keep the momentum going. So thank you. Thank Mac as well and Credential Engine. So I'm going to find my
Carolyn at Ascendium.
Yeah, and Carolyn, thank you. Goodness. There we go. There's my celebrate icon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.